empowered people make informed decisions that lead to living a life without regret. This is Sarah Kaki and Shauna Woods from Atlanta Divorce Law Group, and this is the Happily Ever After Divorce Podcast. Welcome to the Happily Ever After Divorce Podcast. This is Sarah Kaki, and I'm joined by our very own managing partner, Shauna Woods. Shauna, today we're going to talk about alternative relationships. And I'm glad that it's you and I having this conversation because we come from different places on this, and you have actually studied this and you've looked at statistics and you've talked to a lot of couples who have opened themselves up to different forms outside of the traditional marriage or relationship. And quite frankly, I come from a much more old-fashioned belief system on marriage. I'm very much on that belief system of a nuclear type monogamous, committed marriage. And I've never really quite delved into the thought of alternative marriages, open marriage, having multiple spouses, and what all that means. So I'm actually looking forward to quizzing you on this, challenging you on this, and for you to help me get a little bit more insight and understanding. Because I think regardless of what our belief systems are, it is always important that we can take a moment and try to understand other people's way of life and try to understand where they're coming from. And that doesn't mean that you're giving up your own views and your own belief system, but it just means you're becoming more aware of people around you, people's needs. And in the profession that you and I are in, family law, probably incredibly important to understand how every family is different and marriages are different and they're not all cookie cutter. So Shauna, kind of go through what are different alternative marriages, and we'll start from there.
So I do want to say that the first time I ever encountered somebody who was in an alternative relationship was as a divorce attorney. Okay. And I come from a very similar background as you, is when we think of committed relationships, we think of two people in this committed relationship, right? Man and woman, man and man, woman and woman, but there are two people and they've committed to each other in all aspects, including both with the heart and sexually, right? A lot of times that is what we're talking about, but not always. So I want to talk through, and there's a lot of alternative relationships. I think a lot of people try to define in themselves what they mean when they say that. But the ones that I've run across in, my profession, and I've actually known some people who have practiced alternative relationships. So, and I kind of broke them down a little bit. When we talk about alternative relationship, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of people who have explored polyamory. Okay. So we talk about polyamory, that is, you have your one main person, who you may or may not be married to, but it is your one main person. And then both of you can have relationships, full-on relationships outside that one person.
And these are beyond physical relationships.
These are beyond physical.
Intimate, emotional relationships outside
intimate, emotional relationships. A lot of times polyamorous couples will have friends be their other partner's partner, right? They're in friendships. They can go into family meals together. Sometimes they raise children together. So they are choosing full-on relationships, right? That have more than just the two people in them. Okay. Now, then there's something called the open marriage, which a lot of people have obviously heard of, wherein you have, and I'm paraphrasing because again, this means different things to different people, but you have an agreement between the spouses that says you can sexually step outside the marriage.
Okay.
Typically, this does not come with a full-on relationship. It may be somebody you date for a little while, but it's mostly about filling a sexual need outside of that relationship, outside of your marriage. And then the first one that I ever encountered, being a divorce attorney, were swingers, where both parties would go to certain parties or have people over specifically to engage in sexual activities while their partner was also there and with their partner's full knowledge. Each one of these different aspects of the alternative relationships that we're talking about come with their own set of rules that the couples, right, the main couple set for themselves.
So they make a deal with each other.
They make a deal with each other. And a lot of times it's a written deal, but it could just be talking. is that here are the boundaries that we set up for ourselves. For instance, the one swinger couple that I had said that so long as we're in the same house and you're having sexual activities with someone else, I'm okay with that. I know I'm there. But if you do it without my knowledge, then that's cheating.
Okay, so this is important legally because
Yes.
infidelity can actually be a legal term of art.
Absolutely.
And what you're describing would not fall under that legal definition of infidelity.
Right, because what you're talking about is somebody condoning. Right? What the legal definition is, sexual intercourse outside of the marriage. But there's also condoning. So if your partner is like, I know about this.
Then it's not considered outside the marriage.
It's not considered outside the marriage.
Okay.
Right? So this is still inside the marriage. And yes, that's do muddy the waters when you're trying to say, did this person commit infidelity or not, based upon rules that the courts weren't necessarily dealing with before.
Right.
But we're starting to deal with them a whole lot more now. And I think that's what intrigued me to do a little bit more of this kind of what's going on in society and what are the new rules.
Okay, so before I ask 100 questions from my very conservative brain when it comes to marriage and very old traditional thinking towards marriage, first give me the statistics, because I think your statistics are going to crack our minds open quite a bit.
I think it's going to shock somebody. Now, it's not majority, but studies show that between 20 and 25% of people in the United States say they are interested in having alternative relationships.
20 to 25?
25%, a quarter of the adult population. And we break it down a little bit more, and so let's have fun with these statistics. Okay. Single men, what do you think the statistic is?
I would say it's higher.
It is a little bit higher. It's 32%.
So 32% of single men are interested in an open relationship.
An alternative relationship.
In an alternative relationship.
Right, whether that be the polyamory, the swinger, or just the open marriage.
Okay.
So 32% of single men.
Okay.
That number drops when they get married, but only by about 2%. So 30%.
I was hoping it would drop by more than that.
I'm sure you were. Now, 19% of single women say they are interested in an alternative relationship.
Significantly lower than single men.
Significantly, but this is the one that's really interesting. 21% of married women say they are interested.
So it goes up when women get married.
It goes up when women get married. And why would that be?
You tell me, Shauna.
Well, I'm kind of asking the open-ended question, but when I'm thinking about this, really, is that a lot of times women get married for financial security, right? They get married because they want to have a family, right? But they don't always get married to the person that they see as their one. He may be a good provider. He may be a great father. He may even be a fantastic partner. But something in them realizes I'm not personally being satisfied. And I'm not talking just sexually.
Right.
I'm talking, it could be romance. It could be all of these things. Something about this marriage isn't fulfilling the needs that I have. And the parties themselves, and this is a healthy way to do it, right? We're not talking about the ones who are out there cheating or, lying to
She wants to keep their marriage together.
They want to keep their marriage together, so they say, all right, here, we're both maybe interested in this. Here's how we define it for ourselves, right? And we do see these relationships, and I'm not going to tell you these relationships. I don't have the statistics on whether they break up more or less than the traditional marriage that we're mostly dealing with. But I can say is that a lot of times when people first come to you and they start talking about this, there's a lot of trepidation. There's a lot of nervousness and opening up. So part of what we're doing today is talking about the fact that we recognize that other people have values
that are different than ours.
And there's nothing wrong with theirs.
Right.
That's what suits them.
I think what's important to understand, and we get this because we see people who don't want to end their marriages, who don't want to break their families apart. And when they're at that desperate point to do anything to make the marriage work, you open yourself up to alternative options to how can I keep this marriage together? And open marriage is one of the things that comes up to, hey, if we have everything else but this fundamental intimacy piece, but we love each other, we respect each other, we want to stay together, could this be an option for us?
I definitely think that's one way that they approach it, right? And I also think that another way is just that if you both come into it with a mindset of we want an open marriage, that's one thing. Mm-hmm. The most that I see kind of tear cracks in it is, okay, maybe this wasn't our ideal, but this is what we're going to do for now, right? So there's a couple of different approaches to that. And going back to statistics, because I think they're fun, boomers, that's about 12% would say they would ever consider it. So they're the least likely is the older generation.
The baby boomers.
The baby boomers. My generation, the Gen X, is about 23%. Millennials is about 41%.
Wow.
That said they would consider having an alternative relationship. And you would think it was just getting younger as being more open. Gen Z is back to 29%.
What is happening?
It's a very interesting phenomena, I think, where maybe people were open to trying this, right? Mm-hmm. And it either is or is not working. And that's what the younger generation is kind of seeing, because the older generation is very trepidatious. Absolutely not. We were raised in this value. And then they come out and they say, okay, well, we have different values. We determine commitment different than what you're determining it. Mm-hmm. We may commit to each other, but say you're allowed to go step outside sexually of the marriage, or you're allowed to have a partner outside of the marriage. We still define our commitment differently.
Right.
So I do think as it comes along, it's going to be very interesting to see how it develops, if it's a continuing, or if this was kind of a one-off where a large group of people tried this and did it or did not work long-term.
You know what I think would be so interesting is, I think the statistics are too soon to look at now, but probably years down the line when that group that had the 41% you said was a Gen X?
That's millennial.
The millennial group, to watch at some point, did they have a lower divorce rate than the boomers? Does the alternative relationship concept keep more marriages together, or is it breaking more marriages? If you go with, I kind of align myself more with the boomers of like very old-fashioned way of thinking about marriage, but I'm still, my sociological hat is interested to know, is this actually something that could keep more marriages together? I'll tell you, in alternative cultures, for instance, I come from Iran, and there's Islamic law in Iran, and Islam allows you more than one wife, allows a man more than one wife, and there is a very socioeconomic reason for that, and that comes from back in the time when the religion was founded. There were men that would go off to war and would not be able to make it back to their wives and children. So you had the Quran wanted to find a way to protect widowers and their children from being destitute. So they would allow men to take on more than one wife. But here are the boundaries that the Quran set for this. He had to be able to provide for her. He couldn't just take on a wife and her children without providing for her. He also had to be respectful of the first wife and have her buy-in making these other selections and more women. So I think this is interesting to look at and understand that our concept of marriage, even the traditional one, the old-fashioned one that I tend to claim, across time and space doesn't always look the same. Historically, things have changed, and socioeconomic factors have actually impacted what is marriage. And this huge shift that you're describing in statistics between the boomers and the millennials is crazy. And I really would love to know, like, the socioeconomic impact of that we probably won't know now because it's still too early to tell on the millennials. But are we going to generations from now and look back and say they had a higher divorce rate because they were so much more open to alternative relationships, or did they have a reduced divorce rate because of it?
I'm exactly the same way in the way I'm looking at those statistics. It's fascinating to me. And although you wouldn't think it, I actually have the very same kind of traditional look on marriage. If I was to get married than you do, mm-hmm. right? I believe that it would be for me this one person and that's it. I wouldn't want to have the alternative relationships, but I find them fascinating. And I think that they work for certain people. And one of the things that we always talk about when we're talking about your boundaries and making sure that you have this communication, regardless of what relationship you're choosing to be in, right? Mm-hmm. One, make it sure it's the relationship you're choosing to be in. Not that you were pressured into, not that you were talked into, not that came along, right? That you're having this communication about, okay, that felt okay then, and does it feel okay now? Right? And those two things are extremely important in any marriage. You have to define what your relationship is. You have to both be committed to that type of relationship. And you have to define what are your goals. Right? What are our partnership goals? And if I'm going outside the marriage, what are my goals with this other person so that I can clearly define it to my partner?
One thing that I'll say that I can appreciate about everything you said is that couples that, from what you described, couples that are taking this route, it sounds like they are communicating a deal with each other instead of practicing deceitful behavior, which we know from what we do is the deceit that is so painful. That sometimes is harder to get over than the infidelity, the act of infidelity itself. It's the lying piece and the breaking of the trust. So at least this is a form of not walking out on that trust and building a deal with each other.
Exactly. And I think you're going to find some interesting statistics when we get to infidelity too, on that trust and honesty piece.
Well, I look forward to doing that one with you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Happily Ever After Divorce podcast. If you'd like to learn more, go to atlantadivorcelawgroup.com/resources.